Just to let you know, this is the fourth of a series, the last webinar in this series. And if you missed the first three, they are on our YouTube channel. So you just go to demandreduction.com, ncdemandreduction.com, and you can get there on the, it'll be on the website, and then you can also get there on our YouTube channel. So today, we are focusing on legislation, and we're going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then they're going to highlight one or more pieces of legislation that either has recently passed or that's currently being discussed that aims to prevent technology-assisted exploitation. And y'all, we are blessed to have three just experts in the field, all three nationally recognized. So you are just going to be really impressed with the level of knowledge of our three panelists. I'm going to ask Eleanor to introduce herself, and then we'll have each panelist introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll get into the actual discussion of the legislation.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, North Carolina, for being truly a leader. This is probably the only the demand reduction task force is the only one I know about in the country, and that's how you passed the felony conviction for sex buyers, which is, landmark legislation. There are only 3 other states that are doing it. So congratulations, and thank you, Pam, so much for your leadership. I'm Eleanor Kennelly-Gaetan. I lead the public policy team at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Because we have a law center, we're also taking cases that are relevant to exploitation and human trafficking and working very closely together, public policy and law. We really are seeing, some of the worst cases. Before this, I did a number of things most relevant. I met the human trafficking issue in Romania, where I was a USAID officer. And it was just so shocking that there were so many, especially mostly women, between the ages of about 18 and 24, being abused around the world. And then they typically be arrested and repatriated back to their home country with nothing. And I had never seen people who had had so much taken from them. And it just put on my heart the human trafficking issue. And the U.S. is truly a leader. So thanks so much for inviting me, Pam.
Hi, I'm Rick Lane, CEO of IGGY Ventures. I volunteer my time. I know where all the bodies are buried, so to speak, and the history, which is, I think, becomes helpful in some of the debates that we're having today. A couple of the issues that I'm working on now is the NIL AI issue, which is name, image, and likeness, and legislation around protecting the use of a child's name, image, and likeness in AI-generated content. The other bill that I've been working on is KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act. And I'm happy to say that Jamie is here, whose boss is the original sponsor and introduced the legislation. So I'll let her start off with any details on KOSA. And then we can circle back on AI, NIL, and any other child safety tech bill that folks are interested in discussing.
And thank you. I appreciate you all having me here. Thank you, Pam, for pulling this together. Sorry about the technical difficulties. The Senate does not allow you to log in on Zoom for whatever reason. So I'm Jamie Susskind. I am the legislative director for Senator Marsha Blackburn, the senior senator from Tennessee. I've been with her for about 3.5 years, and this is an issue that I've sort of carried forward through the years. And even when I became the lead of our policy team last year, I sort of have kept the, anti-trafficking, anti-exploitation, child welfare work as part of my portfolio. I think in part because I'm the mom of a 7-year-old and I just feel very strongly about these issues. I have been sort of around the tech sector for a while. I used to work with tech companies. I worked at the Federal Communications Commission for almost a decade, was on the Hill once before. But yeah, just really happy to be here and happy to chat with my 2 friends, Eleanor and Rick, about all the work that we're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate all three of you, just giving us a brief introduction and a little bit of your background. And Jamie, I'm going to ask you to start us off with the Kids Online Safety Act.
Sure, happy to do so. So as Rick had mentioned, my boss was one of the two lead sponsors of the Kids Online Safety Act. We introduced it with Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat from Connecticut. We first introduced the bill in 2022, I guess now, following a series of 5 hearings that the two had convened on the Senate Commerce Committee. Formerly, a few years ago, they were the chair and ranking member of the Commerce Committee's Consumer Protection Subcommittee. And so they had, started talking when they got those roles, and they actually had a history of working together previously on tech issues from the Judiciary Committee. And they found that one thing that they both felt really strongly about was the negative impacts stemming from particularly social media platforms, but other forms of, online platforms that exist, right? Video games, streaming, video in some cases, the negative impacts that those can have on kids and teens. And so they first convened a hearing with expert witnesses, academics, and whatnot. And that was actually done right before I started working for the senator. And then we began bringing in tech companies to talk about, the work that they are doing. Arguably not enough work that they're doing, but to discuss the things that members of the committee had noticed being a problem. So we had brought in Snapchat, we brought in twice Meta. I mean, we brought in Meta, we brought in Instagram CEO, we brought in TikTok, we brought in, trying to remember who else. I don't think we had Twitter, but we brought, all of the sort of key players in this space had come in. And then after the 5 hearings, including the Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, I should say. And after the 5 hearings, they came up with a lot of sort of takeaways. And so that translated into the Kids Online Safety Act, which we introduced then. Then it went through the committee voting and markup process, so a lot of edits. And then we reintroduced the bill after it didn't pass that year. We reintroduced it in May of 2023. So the bill got up to 72 co-sponsors on the Senate side. We have a companion on the House side. And then the bill luckily passed the Senate in July by a vote of 91-3, which we were very happy. Folks will say, there's not a lot of things that will pass Congress by a vote of 91-3. There's not a lot of things that people agree on these days, but they did agree on this being a very important and timely and necessary thing that has to happen. So I'm happy to walk you all through the bill a little bit. So the bill applies, as I sort of suggested, beyond social media platforms. We also have some protections in there for streaming services and some for interactive video games. And obviously social media is sort of the main thing that we hear about, but we do hear things about other types of companies. I'm sure that there are those of you who have been reading stories, for example, about video games and certain video games with interactive capabilities where there are predators preying on kids there. And so we wanted to make sure that we were sort of hitting up all of the places that all of these awful things could be happening. So the main thrust of the bill, right, sort of like the big piece, is creating a duty of care. So the platforms would have to actually take affirmative steps to protect minors from a set of harms that we set out in the bill. And so it includes things like suicide, eating disorders, sexual exploitation, trafficking, substance abuse, things like not distributing, narcotic drugs, tobacco products to children on platforms. So we also clarify, right? And there have been discussions, many discussions about whether or not that implicates content. Our view is it doesn't, but we also wanted to be clear that, people can search for the content that they want to search for, including if that is, helpful materials to help you combat eating disorders or combat addiction to substances. We want people to be able to search for all those materials. And then the Federal Trade Commission would have the authority for enforcing that section. So they would be able to go and make sure that the protections that are being put in place by these platforms that have the requisite level of knowledge, if they're not doing what they need to do, then they could be subject to enforcement and penalties by the FTC. The remainder of the bill is enforceable both by the Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys general. We put in provisions regarding safeguards for minors, certain parental tools that need to be turned on by default. One thing we've heard a lot about actually from parents that we've worked with over the years is not having a means to actually report things they learn about, schools as well, I should say, to the platforms, and that they would try and they would ask for people and maybe they'd get a contact and they'd email them and they got nothing. So we tried to create a dedicated reporting mechanism whereby the company actually has to respond within a certain amount of time. We want to make sure we also take sort of emergency circumstances into account, because we've obviously heard of situations where there are kids that are threatened or kids that are saying they're going to kill themselves. And unfortunately, these things happen, and we want to make sure that we're able to get the platforms to sort of respond appropriately and do what they need to do. And I will say, right, like I'll observe that even as recently as yesterday, we started seeing Instagram starting to take more steps to implement pieces of our bill to show, I guess, that they're doing it and that they don't have a need for our legislation, which we obviously would disagree with. Our bill also tackles algorithms, personalized recommendation systems. And so the thing we saw Instagram itself say yesterday, right, is basically you can turn off your personalized recommendation system. And that is, in fact, a thing that we tackle in our bill, right? We have an opt-out mechanism. There is another piece of legislation that is attached to our bill. It was drafted by incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune, which sort of applies that idea to more platforms outside of the kids context. It was called the Filter Bubble Transparency Act. But we have a piece in our bill that basically allows for, the opt-out of using your personal data to fuel these algorithms that we know kids are not only getting addicted to, but also seeing really bad stuff, and it's being twisted in some really bad ways. Another big piece that we have in COSA, as we call it, is third-party audits. We want to make sure that, sort of the bad things are coming to light, right? We want to understand what the protections are that these platforms are actually putting in place. We want to understand how they're mitigating against a lot of these really bad things. I would suspect that they're probably not doing the things that, they may say they're doing. I have seen documents from, one or two of these companies, and it is clear that they have made affirmative choices that, they don't want to spend the money on it. They know that these things are happening and they just don't want to spend the money on it, basically. There's a few other sections in the bill. For example, we do look into age verification. I know that's a big issue that a lot of people have been talking about. It is our view that there's more conversation that needs to happen. So we did direct the National Institute of Standards and Technology at the Department of Commerce to look into how you could do age verification at a device level. We had also required the FTC to create guidance about market research, because we learned that market research is being done on kids as young as 8 years old by these companies. So we think that's inappropriate and it needs to not happen. I think those are sort of the biggest components of the bill, but I'm happy to answer questions and also happy to have Rick and Eleanor fill in other pieces. But obviously, this is a very top priority for my boss. We have been working very hard to try to get this over the finish line this year. We believe it needs to be done this year. We've been working hand in hand with great organizations, including Eleanor's. And, we have very dedicated parents who unfortunately have suffered unspeakable tragedies. Their kids have, either, been harmed physically. They have, unfortunately, in many cases, passed away. They've been here, they've been advocating for this bill. They have been sharing their stories. I'm sure that you all did see when the Senate Judiciary Committee in January held a hearing on this topic that Josh Hawley had Mark Zuckerberg stand up and apologize, even though he then in the same breath said social media has no negative impacts on kids or teens. So this is our top priority. You know, we feel like no more families should go through this. And we know that, you know, folks like you all are vital to what we're trying to do. So happy to answer questions. Let me know how we can be helpful.
Jamie, I have a question. This is something
Sure.
that our organization has kind of grappled with, this idea of age verification,
Yes.
and wonder if and you just mentioned it, of course.
Yeah.
Do you or do other folks in the Senate or that are dealing with COSA have any models that, I don't know, other countries,
Sure.
or what is a suggestion? What do you think would be a good
Yeah.
strategy for age verification for minors?
That's a great question. And I think that in part is why we wanted NIST to give us more information here. I know there are a lot of views. I am not even going to purport to substitute my view. I know a lot of states are passing laws on that front. I would say I have a friend, Claire Morrell, who works for the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She's written papers that are very thoughtful on this. When I'm not talking, I'll drop one or two in the chat. People would probably be served to look at those. I think maybe Senator Hawley's staffer may have done one with her. I think that those are very helpful to look at. I mean, I have my own, which is not me speaking for my boss. I have my own concerns about sort of the effectiveness of age verification and kids getting on the platform anyway, which is why we designed COSA in the way that we did. But not to say there's not an important role to be played for age verification at some point and in some way, but I think it's more complicated than I could probably answer in sort of like a minute here today. So I'll drop some of those links in the chat though. I think they're very thoughtful.
Thank you, Jamie. I
Of course.
appreciate that. And Rick and Eleanor, I know both of you have been working on COSA as well. Are there things that you would like to add?
Sure, happy to. And maybe just talk a little bit about the House side. As you heard from Jamie, the Senate bill is incredibly broad and powerful, which is why it passed by a vote of 91-3 in the Senate. With that vote, we were hoping that this is an easy layup for the House to take it up and move it forward. And unfortunately, that has not been the case. The issue in the House has been that the House leadership has raised concerns about the very important provision that Jamie mentioned, which is the duty of care provision, which is the enforcement mechanism for the Federal Trade Commission and the state AGs and others. And they want that taken out. So the bill has been stalled in the House. And so we're trying to put as much pressure on the House leadership and individual members. So reach out to the North Carolinian members of Congress and tell them that they need to support and ask them to ask the Speaker and the Majority Leader to bring a COSA bill with the duty of care provision to the House floor for a vote. But this is typical what happens at the end of a session and typical for how big tech operates. Until the very end, they do have the ability to gum up the works. They create a massive misinformation campaign that if you want to read more detail about it, there's an excellent Wall Street Journal story on this in Sunday's Journal, and they'll walk you through some of the tricks that big tech has played in trying to stop this legislation from moving to the floor.
Yeah, it's just so cynical what big tech is doing. And in the Wall Street Journal, they confirmed Apple and Meta have spent almost $90 million to fight these bills in the last 3 years. And it's so cynical because they tell the left and left-leaning members of Congress, this is going to undermine LGBTQ plus kids' ability to find out more about their identity. And then they go across the hall to a conservative member of Congress and say, pro-life centers will not be able to communicate the availability of pro-life services. It's all a lie. Like, I work with a law center, work with top conservative lawyers who say, and liberally, we have a very bipartisan shop. Both sides say absolutely not. This is not a free speech bill. This is a product safety bill. What we're witnessing is the dawn of a new movement to protect people online. Those most vulnerable are children. But this is like the days of Ralph Nader identifying the exploding cars, and car companies knew that there were cars that were exploding and didn't give a damn. So it's a product safety. It's a consumer protection bill, and it's beautifully written. I mean, Jamie gives you a sense of how comprehensive it is. It has a lot of elements. And so it's easy for big tech to kind of pick apart bits and spread disinformation. We've got to push back. I mean, the American public, the reason why we had copy pasting of age verification bills across the nation, all Louisiana was kind of the first age verification bill. People were copy pasting across the nation because they want to do something. But here's the problem with most of the age verification bills that have passed across our country: regulate pornography platforms. Now, does Pornhub, and whether or not you can get access to Pornhub, that's something. We don't want kids to have access, such easy access to material that harms their neurological development. However, that's not touching all these devices, which is where kids are getting access to harmful content, right? It's addressing the issue, but it's one part of a complicated issue, and we need, as the lawyers say, belts and suspenders. We need lots of approaches to this problem. COSA is the best, and there's the Senate is so well informed. They consulted with whistleblowers from inside companies who said, yeah, Meta knows exactly what's happening and that kids have negative self-images because of the addictive qualities of these algorithms. They consulted with subject matter experts, academics, stakeholders on the left and the right. This is a beautifully written bill. It is the fruit of great consultation. It deserves to pass. And what's holding it up is politics, pure and simple, and a kind of cynicism that kids' lives don't matter enough to make big tech do something.
I would just add to that, there was a letter just sent the other day to House and Senate leadership from 31 state attorneys general in support of COSA, bipartisan across the states. They know, because they have been in the lead of going and looking into these companies for the harm that they're causing to their children. And they see this legislation as an important piece to their overall effort, because it can't be just at the federal level with the FTC, it has to be working with the states. And that's what this is all about. Is my background, I was the point person, I was the senior vice president of government affairs for News Corp for 16 years. And I was a point person when we bought MySpace, really the first major social media company that was created. And I knew what we could and could not do within the company. And I watched what was happening over in Facebook, and I was horrified. We were taking incredible steps to make MySpace safer, while they were moving fast and breaking things. And that continues. The issues that are happening on Meta and Facebook now and Instagram are not new. They've known about this since 2008 and have done nothing until some positive legislation is moving forward, and they start trying to implement things. You see that across the board. But we need not only to have what Meta is doing, but all the other companies that are going to compete against Meta and want to have a level playing field are unable to, because they don't have the rules of the road to protect their youngest users, because it's not profitable to do so. And that's the thing that's most frustrating for some of us, is that all the money is in doing nothing, and none of the money is to protect kids. Protecting kids is a cost center. And until we change that economic and legal dynamic through legislation like COSA, kids will just be a cost center, and they're not going to take the necessary steps to implement the protections that are so critical to protecting our kids online.
That was beautifully said. Beautifully said. We do have one question, and people always want to hear the statistics, and so I don't know if y'all have these available or not. The question is, do you have any stats you can share with us regarding the age of the victims affected in the gaming platforms and social media?
I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I'm happy to reply with a report from the Social Media Victims Law Center. Excellent entity. And unfortunately, they are busy day and night trying to sue on behalf of families that have lost children to preventable harms. So putting my email, it is available, but I'm not going to, I want you to see the report itself, the data itself.
And there's also the reports of, of CSAM and other harms that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children puts out every year. And the numbers are absolutely staggering. It's in the millions. And so, Eleanor, maybe you can put that link in from the NCMEC reports. And it's only going to get worse with generative AI. And that is going to really push the envelope to how parents can protect their kids, because without any guardrails on that side of it, and without legislation like COSA, it's going to be a free-for-all, and our kids are going to be the ones who are going to be harmed.
It's true. And I will say the reporting numbers should go up. My boss did a bill, not to pat ourselves on the back, but with Senator Ossoff from Georgia, and it was signed into law earlier this year, and it expands the types of crimes that actually need to be reported to NCMEC. It was long overdue. The companies only had to report basically like I know we don't use the term child pornography anymore, CSAM. And that was it. And there were a lot of things that have been happening that are not even being mandatorily reported by the companies. And apparently some of them are now grousing that the law has changed and that they have to report other things. So, these numbers, I think, will be going up. I know they've seen a huge rise in sextortion reports. I mean, I think that's the one that's been going up just time and time again. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing it. I know we've been trying to look into statistics of basically in the period of time that we have been trying to pass COSA, how many kids have been, victimized and harmed just by the inability to get this law signed. So, and that even for like one place is outrageous numbers, just unacceptable.
Yeah, and one of the pushbacks, I just got this on LinkedIn from someone who basically said that, trying to pass this legislation during lame duck and rushing it through. And I said,
that comment was crazy, by the way.
What's that?
That comment was ridiculous, by the way. I saw it last night.
I'm sure you saw my response.
I did. I saw it last night. Yeah.
So yeah, so I was just like, we've been working on this for years. This isn't last minute. And yes, bills do get passed at the end of a session, but this has been a long road, and it's not a knee-jerk reaction and moving something quickly. And then the person wanted to bet me $100 if the legislation would go through, and I said, I don't bet on kids' lives. I work to protect them. And that's the mindset we're up against with some of these folks. The other thing that's very frustrating is the argument that they're making that this COSA will take away parental rights.
Right.
And I'm just, how? The fact that you are giving parents and the ability to protect their kids is somehow taking away parental rights. And what about the kids who don't have parents? What about the kids who are in foster care or those who are runaways? Those kids need legislation like this to help protect them from the harms. And nothing is said about that. And so it's been a very frustrating process. But as you can tell, just on this call, we have some amazing people working on it. But having people like you who are able to reach out to your members is critically important on this legislation and other child safety legislation that is moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Eleanor, I wanted to let you know that the two chats that you put in just went to host and panelist. So if you just want to do the drop down box and put it to everyone, and the same thing with you, Jamie, when you were sending out the Wall Street Journal article, if you'll send that out to everyone. And someone had asked, is there going to be a paywall? I don't know that you know the answer to that.
I do. Sharp owned Wall Street Journal, and we were always the ones that had paywalls.
I'm gifting the free one, so hopefully it should
this
work.
is the one.
Great.
This is the permanent link.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all for that great discussion on COSA. And I really appreciate, Eleanor, that you put further back in the chat that you had put how folks could take action to get their members of Congress. And so I would really like to encourage those of you on the webinar to click on that link and to take action, and also to share that link with other folks in your organization. We would really like to get the House to pass this this session. We are going to move forward now. Rick is going to discuss a topic that has sort of been at the forefront of this movement for a number of years now. So, Rick, I will let you tell us about the CDA.
Yes, the Communications Decency Act, Section 230. So again, being around for a long time, I actually worked on CDA 230 when it was enacted, and it was enacted with good intentions. The idea was that we wanted to provide legal incentives for, back then it was AOL and Prodigy and CompuServe. If any of you remember those companies that are no longer around, but to give them legal incentive to proactively moderate content on their site, because the concern was if they moderated, then they would have knowledge and therefore could be held accountable what people are uploading onto their bulletin boards, because that's what it was back then. But what has happened is over the course of years since its enactment, the courts expanded what was protected, and it basically has become a blanket immunity for anything that social networking sites do, not just on the content that is uploaded, but the conduct of what they are doing and how they're designing their services and sites. And so Section 230 is why we have so many issues, because it basically provides legal immunity from any type of state, civil, or criminal enforcement, any civil enforcement by individuals, and only covers, and there's no liability, is federal criminal laws. And so that basically takes out almost 95% of how you hold businesses accountable. No other industry has this type of blanket immunity on how they're designing and the conduct of what they're doing. And so the goal is to either modify or get rid of Section 230. I'm a big believer in sunsetting Section 230, because that will put the tech community in a situation where they know if they don't make changes to help us fix it, then it will expire. Because right now, if they do nothing, like they're doing with COSA, where they can drag it out to the end of a congressional session, then they win because they no longer have the economic or legal interest. Section 230 is broader. COSA is focused on kids, but Section 230 has broader implications for other harms that occur on the site that impact millions of people across the United States. And so it has become the biggest impediment and for us to try to protect ourselves online, or when there is harm, to be able to hold these sites accountable. And why it's really harmful, and something that Jamie had mentioned, is that there was a couple of whistleblower hearings that were incredibly powerful in what was happening behind the curtain. And the only reason that we know the harms that Facebook and Meta and others were having was because of the whistleblowers. In litigation, there's something called discovery, where you can find out and try to discover if the design was flawed, if they knew that what they were doing was going to cause harm. And because of Section 230, CDA 230, these cases were blocked at the courthouse steps. So they never even got to discovery, which is one of the reasons why we worked hard, and with Eleanor and others, on the FOSTA-SESTA legislation to hold websites that are knowingly facilitating sex trafficking, and children would be able to be held accountable. Because of Section 230, they could have, like Backpage, make hundreds of millions of dollars selling children online and not have any type of legal liability.
Thank you. That was a great introduction to the topic. I mean, is there anything, Eleanor or Jamie, that y'all would like to add, or is there anyone on the webinar who would like to ask a question about that?
It's really good to ground these in real cases. So I'm going to give you a quick description of an actual case that our law center is taking. A 13-year-old boy thought he was talking to a 15-year-old girl, so she asked for nudes. He produced those. She asked him to engage in sexual activity with his 13-year-old friend. They did that. When she wanted to meet, they finally blocked her. 2 years later, a predator posted to Twitter all of those images laid end to end because the kids were on Snapchat and they thought it disappeared. But the predator made a video out of all those still images he had collected. One of the boys was suicidal, and luckily a friend called his mother and the mother intervened, so saved his life. But the point is, he's 15. He goes to Twitter and says, this is child pornography. I take it down. And the parents said the same thing. Look at this. He's 15 now. He was 13 then. Twitter looked at the material and came back, and it's in writing. They said this doesn't violate our community standards. And then now we're suing them, right? I know so many of you are involved in human trafficking advocacy. We're arguing that it's a commercial sex act because Twitter was monetizing those images while they were online. The judge did allow, we got through a couple hoops, but in the end, CDA 230 was used to kick this case out because Communications Decency Act Section 230 is basically allowing criminality to thrive, and there is no accountability. So we're hoping that case goes to the Supreme Court because we need the Supremes to chop off on this. But that is the extent to which a wall has been built around the utter malfeasance of some of these companies.
If I can just add, so there's a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, another bill I worked back in '98. And what it does is it holds websites and entities, online entities, accountable for copyright infringement if they don't take certain steps. And one of the steps is that if I have a movie that's being shown on YouTube, for example, and I didn't get permission, it's being streamed illegally, I can send them a cease and desist, and they have to take it down. It's called takedown notice. And if they don't, then they can be held accountable. So think about this, that Disney has more power to take down a Disney movie that is legal content, by the way. It's being distributed illegally, but legal content has more power to take that down than a parent does to take down pictures of their children engaged in sexual acts. And if you ask them to take it down and they ignore it, you have no rights. So why is it that Disney or any of the other movie companies and record labels and others have more power to protect themselves than a parent does to protect their child? That can't be the policy of the United States. And because of Section 230, that's the way, that is the policy of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. My boss has talked about this issue many times. I think somehow this law has gotten distorted, and what you end up seeing is that the companies are all too willing to take down sort of, inbounds political speech, right? People can have disagreements, people can have different views about, things from like the origin of COVID to, whether or not you like Donald Trump, right? That's sort of normal discourse, but they're happy to take that stuff down. But then when it comes to things like, sex trafficking or nude videos of 13-year-olds, it's like, no, we're fine. This didn't do anything. Yeah, we looked at it. You're fine. And that just, look, I can't speak to the original intent of the law. I have talked to one of the law's drafters, and maybe he's okay with that. I don't know, but it seems like a very warped set of outcomes if this is what we're looking at. And I think it is not acceptable that, families and, parents can't go into court and they can't make a case for, getting these types of videos taken down or getting compensation when their kids go through these horrific things, right? Like that is not a state of justice in this country. I'm interested to see sort of what the dialogue around Section 230 will look like next year when Republicans have control of the presidency and both houses of Congress again. It didn't really go anywhere the last time, but I'm interested to see. So yeah, hopefully there will be some interest and perhaps making some changes here because, this is just not workable and it's just not a feasible set of outcomes. And, it's gone to the Supreme Court in a couple cases, but it just kind of didn't, I don't know, I think they were bad cases, honestly. I just think the facts were not the right ones to sort of make any sort of real impact. So, we'll see.
And I'll say, especially in the Supreme Court cases, the good thing is they actually didn't rule on 230.
Right.
They ruled on other pieces of law around the case itself, but there were some great comments made about 230 from specific justices. And so that also provides some hope in terms of how laws, good litigation will get through to the Supreme Court on these important issues. Because, the big problem for a lot of us in terms of these protections is the awful but lawful problem, which is it's awful speech, but it's lawful speech. And when the government tries to create restrictions on lawful but awful speech, they run smack into the First Amendment. And so that's why all the bills that we've been working on are all conduct bills. Like COSA is a conduct bill. It's the conduct of the site. It's not the speech that is on the site. And that's a very important distinction in terms of First Amendment protections. And so we always have to be careful around that when drafting legislation in this space. But I think Congress and Senator Blackburn and Blumenthal have done a great job in focusing on the conduct side of the ledger to make sure that it's not a violation of the First Amendment.
Thank y'all. We do have one question. Do internet providers have a role and responsibility in this issue?
Are you talking about like the
ISPs? Yeah.
service providers?
That's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking it means.
I can give you a legal answer.
Yeah, the internet
So
providers.
legally they're covered under Section 230. So really whatever 230 applies to, technically it applies to them, right? I don't know. We have it's sort of right, like it's a different part of the infrastructure. So I think it's a bigger discussion as to sort of like what they are technologically capable of doing. And I'm not going to speak for them because I don't frankly know the answer. But they do get the same 230 protections that like an edge provider like Google or Meta or Pinterest or whomever would get. It's kind of a broad brush definition, so it's there. But it looks like Rick might have other sort of like things to chime in.
No, I think Jamie, you're dead on. But interesting enough, under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, they can be sued, and there's actually big cases going through because one of the provisions was that they had to have they had to basically cancel subscribers who are continuous infringers. And that was part of them getting this liability protection. And they ignored it until 5 years ago, until someone finally brought a case. I don't know why it took from 1998 to 2000 to bring a case, but that's a longer conversation. But so they are held liable. But that's the difference. The DMCA, the Section 230 does exclude specifically intellectual property, which is why the Digital Millennium Copyright Act is really the law of the land on the copyright side. So there's liability for ISPs in that space, but for anything else outside of intellectual property, they fall under 230.
All right. Rick, would you like to talk to us about the name, image, and likeness and AI?
Happy to. I think it's one of probably the upcoming issues. And again, Senator Blackburn has been a leader on this with the no fakes legislation, legislation that moved through the State House in Tennessee on the use of name, image, and likeness without authorization. Right now it is unclear if someone uses a child's image and does something that is horrible, taking a child's image and making CSAM out of it. So the child's not actually engaged in CSAM, but they manufacture it to look like they are, and protecting a child's image as it goes through this new AI generative process. So legislation like no fakes, it's basically was kind of pushed because of the Taylor Swift issue and some other very actors and actresses and other famous people. But the legislation is broader, where it does help protect people like ourselves. There's other good legislation that's moving through, and Eleanor can talk about the cruise legislation on AI that Nkosi has endorsed and worked very closely with the cruise office on, if you want to, Eleanor.
Yeah, real briefly, because I know we're running out of time, but it's not a federal crime to upload non-consensual, sexually explicit material. Not a federal crime. And there are 3 bills pending in Congress that will SHIELD Act, which has passed the Senate, also pending on the House side, that would, for the first time, make it a federal offense. And then there's Take It Down, which still has to get through Senate and the House, sponsored by Senators Klobuchar and Cruz. And it would criminalize the publication of image-based sexual abuse and require tech companies to take it down in 48 hours. Just take it down like they do the Beauty and the Beast copyrighted material. And then the third in this group is Defiance Act, which was written by Chairman Durbin, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And it clarifies that CDA 230 was never supposed to provide immunity from CSAM, and it gives a path to justice for CSAM victims. And also it enhances the tools for NCMEC to address CSAM. I'm missing Defiance. I'm sorry. Defiance, we get confused. It's an AOC bill together with Representative Garcia, Republican from California, and it updates like the current law that so it prohibits deep fake pornography and includes images and videos generated by AI. So it's a kind of bill that we wouldn't have seen 4 years ago, but is now crucial today. So that's Defiance Act. I'll post the 3 links. It's a set of 3 bills that are really all very good and complementary.
Yeah, and the purpose, especially with deep fakes, is that it used to be very hard to do a deep fake. I mean, the technology to do it was expensive, complicated, and now there are just apps that you can download and do it. And you've seen a lot of this with both sextortion, as well as cyberbullying of girls who they're using these apps to make nude images of them, then sharing them on around the school. And so this legislation is new, but incredibly important. And we need to stop it now before it gets totally out of control. And then all of a sudden the companies are complaining it's too late, we're too big, we can't do anything about it. But we have to start looking at these issues now before it gets completely out of hand.
Thank y'all. And Jamie, did you want to talk to us about something called the Elvis Act?
Well, I won't talk to you about the Elvis Act specifically, but that's the Tennessee version. So we worked with Senators Tillis, Senator Klobuchar, and Senator Coons, so bipartisan effort with our friends on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And we actually came at this issue, right, sort of from the intellectual property angle, which is a big deal, being from Tennessee and having all of our friends in the music industry that we work with very closely. So, a thing we have been obviously hearing a lot about is the rise of generative AI and the impacts on our creative community. And so we got together and we drafted, as Rick referred to it earlier, right, sort of a name, image, and likeness bill. Although we actually say it's like voice, image, and likeness because name is complicated in this area. And so basically what it does is it creates a new IP right for folks. So you basically have your own voice, image, and likeness, and it would hold individuals and companies legally responsible. And this is for everybody, I should say. It's not just actually performers, if they produce an unauthorized digital replica of you. Similarly, it would hold platforms liable if they host them, if they have knowledge that the replica is not authorized by the individual depicted. And, actually, we'll be honest, when we sort of got together to do this, I hadn't thought about how it could be used to stop online exploitation. I was really only thinking about it in the IP space. And actually, Rick called me and he was like, oh, this bill's really interesting. And, we're looking at it from the child protection angle. And I said, oh, I hadn't even thought about it that way. But, I think that one sort of benefit about creating the right for everybody and not just limiting it to the creative community, right, is that, that shows that like you own you, right? You own, my boss actually likes to say, people own, she calls it your virtual you, like you should own that, right? They should never be able to create an image of you, a likeness of you, and put you in, pornographic situations or some other awful thing. So yeah, I think we will frankly just run out of time this year, but the bill has a lot of support. We created a big coalition, not as big as our COSA coalition, but we managed to somehow get folks that fight over things like a lot, like the music community and the motion picture community and the broadcasters, all on the same page and all happy and all ready to move forward. So the Elvis Act, as Pam mentioned, was actually Tennessee's sort of long-standing digital replicas legislation. And so they updated it this year. Governor Lee worked with the legislature to do so, which we appreciate. And so we had a very robust back and forth on discussing how to sort of preserve certain state laws in doing this. And we came to a compromise whereby we grandfathered some of the state laws because there aren't actually a lot. And we don't want our creators to lose their access to courts in Tennessee. So, certain states have been sort of out in front on this because of performers, but, everywhere else, like this is a new issue. This is a nascent problem that they just haven't thought about. So I think we're pretty hopeful that, next Congress will be able to put this out right away and actually have a real conversation about it and hopefully get this, moving along into the right place, because this is not going to go away. This issue is going to be, sticking around with us and sort of morphing probably beyond our ability to comprehend it and control it.
And I just like to say is that the interesting thing is all these different NIL bills or voice VIL bills work together. Actually, if you look at them as part of a puzzle, they I don't think they planned it that way. But it does. They all work in a very special way to provide greater protections, especially for children. And so my hope is that we work these bills as a package to get through. I mean, some changes here and there, some of the timelines of when you have to, the speed of taking something down is different from one bill to the other, but I think those are things we can work out. But overall, it creates a really nice, comprehensive way for especially children and parents of children who have been harmed, legal recourse to help protect themselves. And that's critically important.
Thank y'all so much for explaining that. And yeah, problems we never thought we'd have, right? Well, Eleanor, there is a state bill that is really interesting that we'd love for you to tell us more about.
In 2 minutes?
No, we've got until 3:30.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought this was an hour-long webinar. Okay. So yes, App Store Accountability Act. Brand new. No one's passed it yet. But we think it has great potential because it focuses on the chokehold. 99% of all the content, the apps that we use and these platforms that we use are coming through either the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. And why aren't those companies are entering into contracts with youngsters? And guess what? It's illegal to enter into contracts with kids under 18. So this would introduce this concept as a reason to say, you got to age gate products that are unsafe for kids under 18. A kind of perverse development out of legislation in the late 90s was this idea that digital adulthood begins at age 13. Now, I've had 5 13-year-olds, and they were not adults at 13. So this bill also addresses that and says, we need parental consent for users under 18. Now, Rick made the point that some kids don't have parents or guardians that are actively involved, and that's why we need other ways to address this, like automatic filters should be turned down. We also work on a bill that's passed in Utah that says when this device is registered to anyone under 18, filters should automatically be turned on. The default should be on, and these phones can be geolocated to exactly where you are, right? So this will be true for Utahns, hopefully other states soon. But the filters are already embedded in your phone. They're in the operating system. They're just buried about 35 levels down in the operating system. So I know when I just registered this phone, they asked me to participate in all kinds of things and stuff was turned on automatically. Well, filters aren't, and that's harming our kids' neurological development. There's plenty of evidence, academic, neutral, nonpartisan evidence that shows the harm to kids. of accessing age-inappropriate material. So I'm quickly talking about two different solutions. One would be automatically default to on for these filters. We call it the Safer Devices for Kids Act. And I think we'll see that in at least 10 or 15 states in 2025. And the others is a brand new idea, App Store Accountability Act. Make these app stores just like it's not Marlboro cigarettes that does the age gating on cigarettes. It's CVS. So same analogy. Let's use that analogy for app stores. They know how old all of their users are between the Apple registration number that you have, or the Apple, Rick knows all these things, the Apple code that you have to put in to get access to anything. These could be used to immediately activate the need to engage with parents, parental consent, and, keep kids out away from the apps that are and also in-store purchases, right? I know families that have been ruined by fees their kids build up. And then truth in advertising. Right now, the apps are rated by the developers themselves, and they're constantly giving their apps ratings that are lower than 13 plus, but harmful material and predators are getting on these applications. So keep that in mind. I'll put a fact sheet, paste a fact sheet into this chat. But anyone who thinks their state might be ready for one of these solutions, happy to talk to you offline and give you more material on the proposals.
Wow, you three have covered a lot of ground today in about an hour. And I want to definitely open it up to questions. And while folks are thinking about their questions and maybe putting those in Q&A, I just wanted to ask if the three of y'all had anything, maybe that another thought has occurred to you while we've been talking about this, anything else you would like to mention?
No, I mean, one of the other bills that we worked hard on that has kind of fallen by the wayside is the Earn It Act, which again could be addressed if we are able to fix 230. We don't need the Earn It Act. The Earn It Act is sort of a sort of fills the gap until we fix 230 in a general way. But it's important that websites take proactive steps to try to stop CSAM from being on their sites. And right now, there is no legal incentive for them to do so. And the Earn It Act, hence the name Earn It, was designed to create that legal incentive that they only get the 230 protection if they earn it by taking proactive steps on the CSAM issue. But right now, again, I think the other side, the tech community, has done such a great job of gumming up the works that I think from a strategic standpoint, if we want Earn It or others, we have to have a sunset of 230 to put pressure on them to do it. Because until we have some type of leverage as child safety advocates, we will not be able to move a lot of these bills through. I think they're still shocked that we got FOSTA SESTA through. And then they're after the fact, saying, no, it wasn't effective. It didn't do all this. I have studies from Carnegie Mellon that show the effectiveness of what FOSTA SESTA has done. And one of the other arguments was, well, they all just moved overseas. Yes, that's it. Sort of like saying we don't want to have a drug-free zone because they might move into the neighborhood next door. But you still have that. I mean, that's the purpose, is to get it out of the United States, then work at and having mechanisms to block those types of illegal activities from coming into the United States. That's the next step. But so the fact that we got one bill through to change and amend Section 230 again was a shock to the system of tech, and that's why they're spending the amount of money that Eleanor mentioned earlier on trying to stop all these volunteer efforts and child safety groups from helping protecting your kids. And until we have more leverage and more parents and more people weighing in, they will continue to win.
Yeah, they spent, I think my chief told me it was like $90 million lobbying against COSA, which I find disgusting. And I guess, one of these companies just purchased a several billion-dollar data center in the state where the speaker and the majority leader are from. So, they'll throw their money at it, right? They were so upset by what happened in, I guess it was 2018, that, they cannot deal with it.
And the other thing, Pam, I'm happy to talk about TikTok as well, and the TikTok divestiture bill, which is also critical, not just from a child safety perspective, but from a national security perspective. So if you have kids on TikTok, Congress and the administration have deemed TikTok a national security threat. So that's not even a question. The policy of the United States is TikTok is a national security threat. It's putting our military at risk. It's putting the folks overseas, and it's putting our children at risk from harm. And so if you have kids that are on TikTok, highly recommend to try to get them off of it, because it's not just their data being collected, but it's the manipulation of their views on the US, the manipulation of their views on US foreign policy, and the manipulation of their views on dividing this country that we see happening all the time now. And so, again, I throw that out as just something to think about when you see a company advertising on TikTok or being part of TikTok, that they are basically fraternizing with the enemy.
Thank you for mentioning that. I'm sure that's valuable to a lot of the folks that are listening in today. Eleanor, Jamie, anything else y'all want to mention? I want to thank y'all for putting so much good information in the chat. So I do encourage everyone to take a look at that. And again, I would like to encourage y'all to go to the link that Eleanor shared about supporting COSA and letting your House representatives know how important that is to you and to kids. Oh yeah, thank you, Eleanor, for putting that in.
So I got just a note. If it looks like, if it says it's unsafe, just give it a couple hours. Like, we have a lot of hackers trying to break into our stuff, and it just happens all the time. That I'm getting a message now that says, like, it's unsafe to go to this website. So maybe try it in a couple hours. I'll get that straightened out.
And Pam, we're going to be sending out, because I don't want to overwhelm the audience with so much that's going on, but there is a lot of stuff going on. But there is a Stop CSAM legislation that the text of the legislation has been put into the National Defense Authorization Act. And overall, the Stop CSAM bill is amazing. It gives resources to NCMEC. It does all these amazing things. But at the last minute, when they dropped it into the National Defense Authorization Act, they changed the knowledge standard. So now it's actual knowledge. And so a lot of the cases that are ongoing right now, where they're going after websites that have harmed children with CSAM, they are now going to probably be almost impossible to win because of this huge, the way they upgraded the knowledge standard. Not just them, but state AGs and others. And this came out of the blue. Nkosi and NCMEC and a bunch of us all supported the Stop CSAM bill because the knowledge standard wasn't as high. It was a constructive standard, which is sort of, it's a lower standard threshold to get to win a case. And then now they have this actual standard. So what will happen is that if this legislation goes through with this one specific provision, kids victimized by CSAM will have a higher standard than anybody else who's going after a website. And that can't be the policy of the United States. It can't be that if a child's harmed with CSAM, that they have now a higher knowledge standard than somebody who's harmed in another way by the same website. And I just think that this is one of those areas that's nuanced. We do not want the bill to die. At the same time, we can't set this precedent that children are not going to be able, and their parents, to hold websites accountable because of a last minute change to the legal standard that creates such a high barrier that they will never be able to accomplish any goals in the litigation process. And so there are a lot of groups that are going to be weighing in, sending letters to the leadership in the Senate, sending letters to the Commerce Committee. and others and the sponsors to let them know of this change, because my guess is many of them didn't know. I didn't know until last week, and so we're scrambling. So we're going to ask you and others to send out this letter to get signatures so that we can weigh in and show that this is not what the U.S. Senate wants to do, nor is it what we need to do to protect our kids online.
Oh, yeah, please send that to me and I'll be glad to share it.
Thank you, Pam.
And Rick, so who proposed this change?
Well, it came out of the committee. They're the ones who have the pen, and it's out of the Judiciary Committee. And again, the standards, as it was introduced, was everyone agreed to. It got a little bit tighter after markup from, after it was taken up by the Senate committee itself and then markup. And then just popped in about a week ago, an NDA that we saw with this very high legal standard. And so a lot of the groups are scrambling to say, wait a second, that's not what we agreed to. And you're putting it into a bill that is so important for entities like NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and others, that they're basically, this is a huge win for big tech if they get this. If this becomes a standard, even if we got rid of 230, you would have CSAM at a different legal standard than everybody else.
So we did have someone ask a question. Could you please explain what you mean by knowledge standard?
Yeah, I always say this. First of all, I'm not aware, but the standard is actual knowledge, so or the intent to cause harm. Now, I would like to believe that there is no intent by people who work at Meta to share and harm children with CSAM images that are on their site. So the intent would be that they intended, like they're a child pornography site and they intended to do that. In terms of actual knowledge, that you knew that that picture was on your site, that you had actual knowledge, versus you should have known that it was on that site because we told you it was on. So this also creates an incentive for them never to look, because if they don't look, it gets back to the internet. It's almost like the reverse of the Internet Act. If they don't look for it and they don't have actual knowledge, they cannot be held accountable. So it creates a disincentive for them to be proactive in this space. So it just reverses a lot of the work we were trying to do with Earn It, and it creates a higher legal standard in terms of holding these sites accountable than any other type of sort of duty of care system that other companies have to face.
So here's all I needed to hear from my lawyers who take cases on behalf of victims. They told me not only would they not be able to use these provisions for the victims we serve, but that it would make it harder to land cases and succeed in cases. So God only knows where it came from or why it came from there, but we call it a poison pill because buried inside the bill is something that makes the bill weaker despite the purposes of the bill.
Yeah. And it's sad because, and it's cynical because it does so much good. And again, it's such broad support, and all of a sudden, the last minute, tech got their hands into it, and whatever they said to whomever was the person with the pen, I don't want to point fingers, but they changed the standard, and maybe it was, oh, well, if you don't change the standard, we're going to kill the whole thing. And so a staffer thinking, well, so it's better to compromise, not realizing that there's already been a compromise on a markup on this, that that they inserted it, and now it really is going to create this massive problem for holding these sites accountable around CSAM specifically.
Thank y'all so much. The information you have shared has just been incredibly valuable. We do have a legislative team that's a part of the Demand Reduction Task Force. And so that team will certainly take all of this information and will try to support as we can the bills that you all have mentioned. I just want to mention also to the folks that are on the webinar that If you would like to find out more information about the Demand Reduction Task Force and about the different teams that make it up, please go to ncdemandreduction.com and see if there is a team that is calling your name that you would be willing to volunteer on and to help move us forward to reduce demand for both sex trafficking and labor trafficking here in North Carolina. Since there are no other questions, I'm going to adjourn us, and just with a final thank you to our three panelists. Y'all have been amazing, and I'm just so grateful for the work that you're doing to protect our kids, but also to protect anyone who's vulnerable in our country. Just appreciate your work. Thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Pam. for all
Thank
the
you
stuff
so
that you
much.
guys
Thanks
do
for
with
doing
Thank
this.
grassroots
And
you.
level.
special shout out to Nikki Miller.
Take care.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Bye-bye.